Every single being has a story. And every single human being carries shame. And the more shame you have, the less you want to talk about it. And so our Enneagram pattern, our behavior is just driven. It's this coping strategy that we've got habitually addicted to, that actually as leaders can get us what we don't want. It can render us untrustworthy in other people's perception, for example. And so the Personal Mastery Lab is all around looking at mastering myself first. Because if I'm going to influence other people, then I have a responsibility to manage my response ability as opposed to my reaction. Because hurt people, and healed people heal people. And if you're a manager, if you're a parent, if you're a leader, if you are anybody of influence, if you're in sales, if you're an entrepreneur, then you got to heal yourself.
Okay, welcome fellow entrepreneurs and goal getters to Entrepreneurial Elevation, Unleashing Greatness Within with myself, your host, Kelly Beveridge, and my guest all the way from South Africa today, Saffron Baggallay. And I'm so excited to have her here. We're going to talk about Enneagram. She's going to share what that is. She's an Enneagram expert, a facilitator, coach, and author. She's the founder, owner, and CEO of Personal Mastery Lab, where over the last 23 years, she's been designing, developing, and delivering personal mastery-based leadership programs through the lens of the Enneagram. And I'm just really excited to pick her brain. We were just chatting about how we've actually never met in person, yet we feel like we've been lifetime friends. We connected when I was in South Africa living there, and we've just stayed connected because we're like-minded. We enjoy each other's energy. And we're going to talk about this. We're the same type when it comes to the Enneagram, which is type 7. And so just welcome to the call or to the episode, the Saffron. And today we're going to talk about what is Enneagram and how it impacts and influences leadership and self-mastery. So just welcome. And Saffron, if you could come on and just say hi, and then let's dive right in. And let's start with what is Enneagram anyways, for the listeners who might not have heard about it before.
Yeah, Kelly, thank you very, very, very much for inviting me as a guest on your wonderful podcast. And hello to all your listeners. Yeah, the Enneagram is actually the Ennea, E-N-N-E-A, is 9 in ancient Greek. And Grammy is in Greek connection. And if you look at the symbol of the Enneagram, and anybody listening who isn't familiar with the symbol can just Google Enneagram symbol, you'll see that it's a 9-point system that is, each of those numbers represents what is commonly called a personality type. But I think what really separates the Enneagram from the likes of Myers-Briggs and DISC and Insights, all of which I'm qualified in as well, what really separates the Enneagram and why I chose to pursue it the way I have is because it doesn't talk about our behavior. It talks about what drives that behavior. And so we're not wanting to type you or put you in a box. Actually, the opposite is true. It's to get us out of that box, because what we don't realize is that we've unconsciously got this lens, this pattern, this addiction, as I often refer it to cope. And so often when we talk about the Enneagram, I don't even refer to it as a personality type, because for me, that feels very limiting. And as a 7, I don't want to be boxed. That's something that the 7 hates. What I'm interested in is, how do we use this to map, and in a way, a mirror, to develop ourselves, to actually get out of a box, to realize that we have this lens that sometimes gets us what we don't want. So I refer to the Enneagram as a coping strategy. And I'm very pedantic about this. I train leaders all over the world in corporates, and I'm extremely pedantic about this, even in a corporate, even with lawyers, I'll say. And they're the toughest gig of all, I can assure you. Even with lawyers, I'll say every single human being has a wounding. Every single being has a story. And every single human being carries shame. And the more shame you have, the less you want to talk about it. And so our Enneagram pattern, our behavior is just driven. It's this coping strategy that we've got habitually addicted to that actually as leaders can get us what we don't want. It can render us untrustworthy in other people's perception, for example. And so the Personal Mastery Lab is all around looking at mastering myself first. Because if I'm going to influence other people, then I have a responsibility to manage my response ability as opposed to my reaction. Because hurt people, and healed people heal people. And if you're a manager, if you're a parent, if you're a leader, if you are anybody of influence, if you're in sales, if you're an entrepreneur, then you got to heal yourself. Got to master yourself. Otherwise, you do damage to other people. So that's my message. And the Enneagram is the lens through which I dive in. And I always joke with my clients and say, I'm like the chicks at the casino. Once I got your numbers, baby, I can change your life, but only if you let me.
Yeah. That's so awesome. That you just shared so much wisdom in explaining what the Enneagram is. And wow, like so many layers to it, right? Really to get to the core. And as you're speaking, I'm just thinking, what's great is it's an awareness tool. Like it's awareness. I like to say awareness before change. So if you know what your lens is, you're able to show up differently for yourself and then obviously for other people. Such a powerful tool. I'm excited to dive in and talk to you about this. How did you come across the Enneagram for yourself and what drew you to it?
So I've always been totally fascinated by people. I can tell you from 6 years old, 5 years old, I have memories of being really fascinated with everybody that didn't look like me. I grew up in apartheid South Africa. My family were always like, no, come back. You're not allowed to talk to that person. I've got literally videos of me as a kid going into like literally huts and talking to people that in those days was illegal because I'm literally fascinated. So I went to study sociology. I'm a social scientist. That's what I studied in Trinity College in Dublin, ironically, because my parents were Irish. So I went back to the old country and discovered boys and beer and not a lot about anything else. When I came back to Wits and did my master's, I learned a lot more. But I was a social scientist anyway. And so I actually, when I was 21 years old, which was a very long time ago, I was hitchhiking across the United States. And I met this guy in a beat up old pickup truck, this kind of hippie guy. And he started talking to me about this thing called the Enneagram. And to me, it just sounded like this amazing way to manipulate people and get what I wanted out of them. Because I knew I wanted to be an entrepreneur and I wanted to run my own business and I wanted to rule the world, but I didn't really know how I was going to do that. I just wanted to be rich. And I thought, this is brilliant. I can hack into people's lives even better now. What I didn't realize when I really began to study it formally in around 2000, that actually that's not what it's for at all. And in fact, primarily it's a spiritual tool. It's only really got psychometric status in the last sort of 10 years and really only being used in corporates in the last 10 years. Prior to that, the whole purpose of the Enneagram, as you said, was to become aware of the ego and learn to let it go. So I would say I'm the only leadership teacher or facilitator or coach that teaches leaders to let stuff go, not learn more. We don't need to learn anything more. We really, as you say, see it, become aware of it, and then let it go. And so when I was 28, which was, I don't know when I was 28, but it was a few years after I started really learning the Enneagram formally as a way to hack into other people's lives, I started to realize how profoundly it was changing my life in a spiritual way, in a very deep way. And that's totally when I binned all the others. I just thought, sorry to anybody listening who's a Myers-Briggs fan, but they're all rubbish as far as I'm concerned compared to the Enneagram. And by the way, Myers-Briggs is fundamentally flawed. Sorry to be rude, but We don't think of humans as being introverts and extroverts anymore. We think of everybody being an ambivert. So the Enneagram came into my life an awfully long time ago. And I think that the thing that it's given me the most is profound healing and the ability to give me the ability to forgive myself for being me.
Mhm.
And that's when after 8 years of studying it formally, I thought, other people navigate this stuff. If I'm navigating this stuff, then surely other people must be too. And that's when I decided to turn it into my career.
Yeah, that's so amazing, Saffron. Wait, how?
Yeah.
So you said there's 9 types, and we discussed we're actually just happen to be the same type, which is type 7. Can you speak to, because you're speaking about yourself right now, and I want to ask what are the qualities or characteristics of a type 7, for example? And then you said the biggest thing you got from yourself was healing. Can you explain more? Was it a process you went through? Was it understanding yourself at a deeper level? Was it developing skills based on your Enneagram type? Like, how did you lean into it being a healing modality for yourself?
All of the above that you've just mentioned. I think, though, what it gave me, so firstly, I just want to say again, it's not about behavior. It's about what drives behavior. And in the Enneagram, I often liken this to a 10-story building. I use that as a metaphor for awareness. If I'm living in the basement of my building, I've got zero awareness. If I'm living in the penthouse, I'm deeply aware, probably self-actualized. Very few of us in the real world are there. Most of us are living in the 5, 6, 7-story, 4th story. So the behaviors will look very different. So you and I can both be a 7, but if we're living in a different floor of our self-awareness, we won't behave the same way. Which is why I don't talk about behaviors necessarily. I talk about the driver, and what really drives 7s is a lack of trust around whether or not they can rely on other people. So some of the typical behaviors around that would be, I'm going through something incredibly difficult and nobody would ever know. I still show up charming. I still got it together. I can still tap dance. I can still do my thing. But a lot of the time, the mask of the 7, which is this kind of upbeat, optimistic, it's often referred to as the optimist. It's a mask. It's a coping strategy for an underlying loss of connection, really. And I always talk about the early wounding of the 7, if I may share, Kelly.
Yeah, please.
The early wounding of the 7 is that their primary caregivers were not reliable. Maybe their mom went off back to work very early because they had to. I'm not blaming anybody's family story, or maybe whatever. It doesn't matter. Whatever the reason, whatever the story, that was the perception that 7s in their early childhood development came to realize or believe or think they believe. And as a result of that, they come to learn to rely very much on themselves and on the coping strategy of getting mentally distracted. So 7s have lots of friends, lots of hobbies, lots of stuff, lots of plans, lots of things that they're doing. And this busyness, and I know you're smiling because I'm telling you the truth, right? This busyness is a way of running away from pain. And
It's
you
so
ask
crazy.
me, isn't it?
I'd like just to share, because as you're speaking, you are explaining me. Yeah. And I like this because I was going to ask, as you're speaking, because you say it's not the behavior, what drives the behavior, right? So the lack of trust of whether you can rely on other people. So even just understanding that gives myself, and I'm sure the listeners who can relate, a different lens to understand why we show up a certain way in situations or relationships or business or leadership.
And in relationships, whether they're intimate, professional, personal, parenting, spouse, any relationships, to understand like what would really hurt that person. the Enneagram gives us that beautiful insight. I often say in South Africa, we've got 12 official languages in this country. And I am so blessed because I speak 27 languages. I speak the language of the Enneagram. And that's the gift of the Enneagram. It's about saying to you, if you and I were colleagues, hey, Kelly, so my wounding, and you might not use that word with a colleague, is around reliability. So it's going to be a trigger for me if I can't rely on you. It's going to be a hurt. It's going to be an issue for me trusting you if you're not consistent. And to be able to communicate that to people right off the bat, when you hire them, when you maybe date them, it's really profound. I do a lot of couples coaching in my private coaching practice too. And it's so amazing to sit with a couple and provide them with insights that can solve issues that they've had for 20 years. You can solve in half an hour. Because I would never have imagined from your behavior that was the wounding. Mm-hmm. That's the trick. And the things, it can take us 10 years with a psychologist to figure that out too. Whereas with the Enneagram, we go, douche. Wow. And I see even in my rooms, like people they'll tear up, they'll lamp up, because it's hitting something. And that is the profound awakening that I think gets people to acceptance. After awareness comes acceptance. And I just noticed the emotion, but I'm aware that I'm not coaching you. I'm doing a podcast. Sorry. But I did notice the emotion that you just swallowed. And only when we learn to accept can we take action. Mm-hmm. And that's what the Enneagram gives us, that beautiful ability, certainly in my experience, to go, I'm not alone here. This isn't something that I've got to self-correct. I'm not wrong for experiencing this. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, no, it makes so much sense. And once again, it gives that awareness so you can then lean into acceptance. And I'm just curious, for those people who are listening, can you share a few other examples of some drivers? Because you're speaking, I'm really hanging on to what you're sharing because you led with speaking of the drivers of what my quote unquote type is. What would be some other examples of drivers for those who are listening so they can relate it to themselves?
Yeah. I'll take Canada as a country since you're Canadian. So I don't teach the Enneagram like anyone else in the world. I don't know anyone who teaches it like me because I'm really interested in somatic intelligence. I'm really interested in energy, which is why I don't talk about it ever as a behavioral thing. It's about energy and woundings and coping. So if I take Canada, and I'm saying this because we don't only have an individual consciousness, right? We've got a collective consciousness. So as a culture, Canada has a culture. And my belief is that as a country, the culture of Canada is 9. So the 9 driver is just keep quiet. Don't be too assertive. It's not okay to be too assertive. Why? Because I want to keep the peace because I don't want any conflict. To me, Canada is a very nice place. It's all very nice. Do you know what I mean by that?
I do. And we get that. That's actually the feedback I get as I travel, right? We're known as the polite country.
Yes. And yet, Canada for me also has this kind of underlying tension, which is never spoken about because everybody's very nice. And nobody wants any conflict. So you're all very politically correct. As a South African, I'm the most unpolitically correct human. I've got clients in Canada. I'm constantly apologizing. And they're like, no, say it. We love your openness, but we never hear it here. So the driver is, and this is the wounding for the 9. And this is where I have a lot of compassion for 9s. There was a belief in the early childhood development that my voice doesn't matter. And my brother's a 9. He will often say things like, but it doesn't matter. And if I'm feeling nice to him, I say, no, it does matter. Say it. If I'm not liking him, then I ignore him. And that's a joke, because you should never, ever ignore nines, because they've already got this wounding around being muted. If I take South Africa as a country, we're a 6 country. We're very suspicious of each other all the time, unless we're winning the World Cup. Then we love each other.
I love that. I was curious. I was going to be curious what you were going to say South Africa was. So what's the wounding of a 6?
So the 6's wounding is, I can't trust myself. Now they project that onto everybody else. I can't trust you. I can't trust the situation. I can't trust what you're saying. So they project that. But actually, it's a self-doubt, chronic self-doubt. And South Africans do doubt themselves. We do. We actually are very competent, amazing people, but we always think Canada's better, America's better, Europe is better. There's a lot of doubt in us as a country, as a nation. And the reason for this, Kelly, is because in the early holding environment, and I'm now talking about 6s in personality, there was an experience, whether real or imagined, where an authority figure was threatening. And that 6, obviously, because they were an infant, they couldn't protect themselves from that authority figure. And so that's where that doubt comes from. And as a result, all 6s throughout their life, no matter how much work they do on themselves, have a cumbersome, complex relationship with authority. They can either be very compliant or very rebellious against authority, because the wounding is around trusting authority. There's another type, the 8 on the Enneagram. The wounding is all around betrayal. So their driver is to protect themselves, watch their back. So they show up strong. They come out fighting. But it's a protection mechanism. I always say when an 8 is fighting, it's an act of love. They're fighting against justice or for justice. But they get themselves into a lot of trouble because people just think that they're a bully, or they're too much, or they're too loud, but none of that is true. And that's really why I love the Enneagram so much, is because it really helps us see what's under the hood.
Yeah. Gives us a perspective to be able to understand people from a different light, from a different lens, and why they're showing up the way they're showing up. And what's so interesting, everything you're sharing, I can sit here and talk to you about this forever. There's so many layers to it. And so if these are examples of the woundings, what would you say would be the value of understanding? I am thinking of this almost like the love languages, right? I know what my love language is, which is quality time. Yet knowing that not everybody's love language is quality time, and realizing, oh, I've been attempting to love in the way that I like to be loved. And it's actually better for the relationship if I love that person the way they like to be loved, not the way I like to feel loved. So I'm relating this in a way as you're speaking to that. It's like understanding what mine is so that I have better awareness of how I'm showing up and why I'm feeling the way I'm feeling and behaving the way I'm behaving, and how to shift certain things to get different results, yet also in relationship, how to improve the relationship, whether it's personal or professional, and speak to or relate to that person in their Enneagram. And so can you speak to maybe 2 or 3 examples from a self-mastery perspective and then from a leadership perspective? What are the benefits of taking time to know your type and to understand other people?
Yeah. So I'll start with the personal mastery aspect. So module 3 of my program is all about unconscious bias. There is no better tool, in my humble opinion, and I wrote my master's on this. There is no better tool for unpacking your bias. So an unconscious bias, if I'm a leader, if I'm a manager, I may be treating people differently in the team. I don't mean to, but I am, because of my unconscious bias. So there's an example of how the personal mastery aspect. Another example, and this again is what I do in my master classes, is if you look at the symbol of the Enneagram, you'll see that the 7, for example, or any of the numbers, are connected with 2 other numbers. In the 7's case, that's the 1 and the 5. Now, these are known as the developmental lines, because if you know the Enneagram, you'll realize that it is so clever that our blind spots as leaders, as managers, as entrepreneurs sit in those lines. So my work, when I teach people my 5-month leadership program, Personal Mastery for High Performance, the whole objective is how do I really up my game, increase my performance, not from changing myself, but from integrating these lines. That's what I teach, literally. How I develop myself, grow, expand my perception. That is literally the end goal of my program. Expand your perception of yourself first. And then moving on to how do I then manage this with others? For me, the best way to describe this is it gives us a language to draw the best out of people, obviously, if we know their type. But even if we don't know their type, to become aware that the way they're hearing the situation, the way they're feeling the situation, the way they're experiencing the situation, the meeting, the solution, the problem, the tender, the proposal, anything, the sale is completely different. For example, for us, Kelly, our work as 7s would be to become aware that we don't process feelings very easily. We can be inappropriate. We can miss people's feelings. So if we're managing people as entrepreneurs or selling to clients or whatever, that could possibly be a problem if we're dealing with a 2 or a 4 who are very, very tuned in to the emotional content of a conversation. So I hope that answers your question as to how it can be practically applied and used. Now, again, it's also very versatile. You can use it in relation to Johari Window, Brené Brown's Braving Model for Trust. So my module 4 is all around trust. How do we build trust? Because what we learn from the Enneagram is my perception of what trust looks like and somebody else's perception of what trust looks like isn't the same perception because of the Enneatype, because of the lens. So how do we learn to then communicate, to literally say, these are my boundaries and this is why. What are yours? How do we work together? Because we're in a team, for example. So it begins to open up communication with insight, powerfully, quickly, for high performance. And, one more thing, very important. We all waste a lot of energy on our neuroses. And what the Enneagram can give us is an insight into, you don't have to be neurotic about that. It's just a pattern. How do we rewire the pattern? And I give a whole lot of skills on how to do that. And then we don't waste as much energy. So then we can perform, we can get results. So that's a big thing for why we
love that. I love what you just shared because I love everything you just shared, but even just talking about wasted energy on neuroses, like something happens or somebody does something that triggers you or somebody says something or a result doesn't go your way, or you and I hopped on the podcast episode today and the Wi-Fi wasn't working. So we had to troubleshoot, right? We found a solution in a few minutes. And so yet how much energy is wasted on what isn't working or what we don't agree with or what triggers us. And learning how to shift that. So what would be some ways that you could shift that quicker?
Most importantly, become an independent observer of your pattern. When, who, and what triggers me? And can I start to see a pattern? Because it's just all about patterns. So back in the day, I would have been in a complete panic about our technology not working because I have a belief that I must be perfect in a professional environment. I need to be perfect. I need to know it all. That's the one in us, Kelly. That's the one. So now I recognize that this is part of my belief system. Often when people say to me, what do you do for a living? If I don't tell them that I am a wig maker just to see their reaction, because I love to see people's reaction, I will say I help people deal with their BS. I help people deal with their belief system. So if you can become an independent observer of your belief systems and start to notice the patterns, each type has what we call a mental fixation. When you learn the Enneagram, you go, that's just my mental fixation kicking in. Cool. How can I change that thought? Who would I be without that thought? So in essence, on my programs, I teach people how to coach themselves. Now that they've got the insight, they've got the map, they've got the mirror, whatever you want to call it, they go, yes, I can completely relate to this. Now that I've got that awareness, can I coach myself? That's the action I can take. So in essence, that's what I teach on my programs. Because that then gives you the freedom to get out of the paradox, which is your personality. I always talk about your personality as the paradox.
Love it. Yeah. Then share more about that. What do you mean that your personality is a paradox?
So pick a number from 1 to 9, and I'll give you an example of what I mean.
3.
Okay. So every type on the Enneagram has a basic fear. Every human has basic fears. Fear is what keeps us out of connection from one another. Fear is what stops us from living our potential. Fear is what trashes our self-esteem, whatever. So every Enneagram type has a very specific fear. The 3, for example, the 3's fear is, what if I fail? Now, none of us want to fail. None of us like failing. None of us seek failure. But for the 3, their entire life, their entire wounding is around, if I'm not seen to be the best, if I'm not seen to be the best, can you imagine this? If I'm not the best, if I don't win, if I'm not seriously successful, I'm not even going to be seen. Now, every human wants to be seen. Every human needs to be seen. This is the great paradox with all humans, is that we want to be seen, and yet we are afraid of what people will see. And nobody embodies that like the 3. The 3, anybody listening who is a 3 or resonating with the lead type 3, you will know what I mean when I say the 3 has an audience that they are always performing for. And what happens for 3s is they go into any space, doesn't have to be a stage, any meeting, any room, and they immediately, unconsciously, they're going, who do I need to impress? So what they do is they adapt, which is a great quality until it isn't, because I don't know who I am in all my adaptation. And so the fear, the reason for all this behavior is because the self-worth of a 3 hangs on how successful the audience sees me. It's not about how I feel. In fact, 3s often, even though they're wildly successful, they can feel like a fraud. Because my self-worth depends on how successful I am. It doesn't matter how many goals I reach, I never quite feel better. So can you see what I mean? Success and failure to a 3 is very different to success and failure for the rest of us. We don't literally hang our identity on it the way the 3 does. So a great example of a 3 would be my dream guy, Michael Jordan. I've been wanting a date with him since 1990. Nice. He's a typical 3. But when the Chicago Bulls were absolutely at their height, Michael Jordan had a lot of resentment, actually, because he was carrying the team. This is what happens for 3s. And so good at winning. And they're not competitive with other people. They're competitive with themselves. But you see how what I mean by this drive to not fail actually can breed resentment, that I'm the only one that can make this happen.
Mm-hmm.
So there's an example of how fear becomes this paradox. Now, what 3s, if they can learn to integrate this paradox, they realize that actually self-worth is the answer. Then I can be hugely successful, but I don't have to, it's not about proving myself. And 3s will always be successful because they're massively competent with the best work ethic of anybody else on the Enneagram.
Yeah, yes, everything you're sharing, I'm like hanging on every word, because as you're speaking, I'm thinking of people who in my mind, in my life, in my important relationships may represent what you're explaining, the qualities and characteristics and how they show up. And just the value of that, right? I've done a lot of different personality tests and I have some and teach some too. Yet as you're sharing, this is very in depth. And I love that you talk about being an independent observer of your patterns, because when we become stuck or with our own pattern, that just seems like the insanity cycle, right? Doing things over and over again, expecting it to be different. It's such a great, once again, awareness tool of almost looking at above ourselves, at ourselves with how we react, right, in these patterns so that we can, or does the trigger ever go away? It's probably always there. We just learn how to shift quicker. Oh, it's shift. Oh, the shift. So how do you know if, without studying the Enneagram as well as you know it, is there a way to understand who the people in your life are, in what patterns they may be, simply through our interactions with them? Like, how do we know how somebody would be without them taking a test or a quiz, or is that the only way?
Yeah, the test, the quiz, the assessment, whatever, isn't the only way. And I'm always a bit like, assessments are always assessments. They are not 100% correct and accurate, although I do think that so by the way, there are a lot of charlatans out there. There's a lot of rubbish on the internet. It's something that really winds me up. Like, you should have studied the Enneagram for like a decade or at least 5 years before you teach it, kind of stuff. So be very mindful, anybody listening, of not going, oh, you're this and you're this because I've read a book or I've watched a webinar or whatever. I think it also is so easy to do that too, isn't it? Because we do tend to go, oh, but there's a behavioral quality. Oh, that must mean that you're this. And to your point, it is a very accessible tool very quickly. But I would always encourage people to use it as a personal mastery tool for themselves first. If you would like to use it as a management tool, which it's very, very good for, then you either get people to do the test or you simply listen better for what you're hearing people say, not necessarily go, oh, that must mean, but to go, oh, that's important to you. And when I have some understanding that these things are important to people, like not being betrayed, not being seen as a failure, maybe then it gives me just an insight to more intentionally listen, I would say is the best place to start.
Yeah, I love that. And so definitely, because I know that there's certain people out there, and I would be guilty of this from time to time too. Oh, I want to learn this tool so I can fix that person or whatever with that person. Or no, it's about self-mastery and personal growth, personal development, looking within. And so I have a few other questions to ask. Yet while we're on the topic, Saffron, how can people get a hold of you and learn more about this? Because I have a feeling the listeners are going to be intrigued. And even for myself, you're creating a lot of curiosity. So I know you have an assessment on your website, yet how can they get a hold of you, and what do you have to offer in the way of learning about the Enneagram?
I would love lots of people to get hold of me. So thank you. I want world domination with the Enneagram, just to know. So I'm not that I'm ambitious or anything. So people could probably, the best way to get hold of me is to email me, because I am in South Africa. Time difference, WhatsApp or email are the best thing for me. I don't know if you want me to speak my email address, or you're just going to put it down somewhere.
I'll put it in the show notes so that everybody can go in and grab your email and grab your WhatsApp. That's awesome that you're offering that so that they can personally get a hold of you.
Yeah, WhatsApp, if you want my attention quickly, is the best way to deal with me. I live in the mountains in the middle of nowhere in the Western Cape, and so we don't have any phone lines. So WhatsApp's definitely the way to go. And then the way that I teach the Enneagram is I have 4 fully online personal mastery based Enneagram programs. The one is called Personal Mastery for High Performance. It's all about, you have to have people that report to you or run some sort of business or whatever, work with people, sell to people. You've got to work a lot with people to qualify for that program. And then I have a program called Women in Leadership, all about focusing on how women can grow their confidence in themselves, specifically with the Enneagram, because I think a lot of women are technically really competent, but then they don't have confidence to back that up, particularly entrepreneurs, because we work in isolation a lot. And then I have a program called Self-Esteem for Leaders, which focuses on the Enneagram as well. Those are actually the three that really teach the Enneagram as a whole system. And so my objective with those programs is to give people a working knowledge of the system of the Enneagram, but mostly to go through all the 9 types that exist in themselves first. Because when I've really asked myself how I can, for example, narcotize, meaning I can just avoid situations. We're 7s, we're not 9s, but we can still do that procrastination avoidance stuff. We can. And then what we tend to do is eat 11 slabs of chocolates or drink a bottle of wine or eat a pizza or whatever our thing is, because 7s are gluttonous. But we can all do that self-avoidance stuff, is what I'm getting at.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that as leaders and as entrepreneurs and as people of influence, the more we can embody and embrace all the facets of us, the more we can then see it and connect with that in other people.
Mm-hmm. So true.
So yeah. So if I've done so all my programs, I'm a nerd. There's no way else to describe me. I'm just a total nerd. So every single thing, I have 38 different qualifications in the Enneagram. For goodness sake, that's a little gluttonous right there. So I became obsessed with getting qualified in the Enneagram for a few years. But I think that every single leadership lesson that I teach, every single week of every single program that I teach, that leadership lesson is there to represent the Enneatype that I'm teaching, or the Enneatype is there to represent that lesson. So leaders get a really good sense of where that type might excel or not, depending on their level of health too. But that's the objective, is that with all my programs, you get a working knowledge of the Enneagram, how it relates to you, and then of course, inevitably, it works with other people. If I have a team, what's most profound, for example, if I have a finance team or an executive team or a marketing team or whatever working together on the program, then they obviously all know each other. But or a small company, like I've got a couple of clients, entrepreneurial clients, the whole company's doing it together. But again, there's no hard and fast rule, because I've also got clients with 150,000 employees that do hundreds of people a year on my program. And again, it's an incredible byproduct of my program is that people make friends at work. They literally meet each other in the corridor afterwards and go, oh, you're an 8, I'm an 8. Let's hug each other because we're both 8. There's a beautiful connection that happens as a byproduct. But I think one must be very mindful when one is teaching the Enneagram as a working knowledge of the Enneagram, that people don't go away then and think that they're an expert in the Enneagram where they can start typing people, because that is not the objective with this tool. And then one last thing I'm going to say, Kelly, is I never recommend the Enneagram as a recruitment tool, because I think that any type on the Enneagram could be really good at any job. It's not about the type, it's about the person. And we are all a unique version of our type. We must never lose sight of that.
Yeah, I love that so much. I love that you just shared that. So I think we're going to have you back on, because there's so many more questions that I have and our time is running out, and I still want to dive in, and maybe we'll have you back on for part 2 to talk about the difference between, you talk about the Enneagram being emotional intelligence, yet your passion also is the energy and the somatic intelligence, which is healing in the body. And I know that a lot of people I know are gravitating towards the somatic practices. And so I think it would be great to have you back on for a part 2. Before I ask you my final few questions, can you just share, as curiosity's sake for the listeners, what is the difference between the emotional intelligence and the somatic intelligence?
Yeah, I was hoping you'd ask that. To me, somatic intelligence is just putting emotional intelligence into action. Certainly the way I teach it in a corporate environment is just learning how to tune in to the signals that the body is giving you. Anybody who went to school really is only focused on the cognitive. And then we forget that the whole body system is talking to us all the time. And also we're so seduced by the outside world. So for me, somatic intelligence, and as there's lots of practices, there's breathing technique, we could go into any direction.
Mm-hmm.
But I think for me, the way that I teach it anyway is to become aware of where the body traps energy. So I often use the example of the nine, since Canada is the nine country, but people who are nines, and some of your listeners might relate, they will often, 99% of the time, they'll have pain, physical pain in their coccyx. Because they store all their stuff in their lower back. The whole psoas, in fact, this whole psoas area is where the nine feels everything. That's why nines can be really, really procrastinators, because they're taking in so much. They don't even know what to think. So that psoas is very active. So I can literally talk to you all day about where in the body it shows up, different types, and even different breathing techniques that are good for different types. So somatic can go to that extreme, but the way that I teach it in corporates is simply to tune into the sensations in the body to manage emotions, really.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And another valuable awareness tool, right, about ourselves and listening to our body and learning about our body. So we're definitely going to have you back to talk about somatic intelligence, because I think that there's lots that we can uncover there and learn from you about it. And Saffron, I have a few questions. So, you've had a few chapters in your life. I love your story about you hitchhiking at 21. And coming across this hippie guy that actually brought all of this learning to you in the first place and got your mindset on it. So what would you say now, all these years later, would be your version of success for yourself?
Sure. Honestly, the first thing that came to mind, the first word that popped into my head was peace.
And what does that look like for you? Yeah. What does that look like for you?
What it senses like for me in my body is a sort of lightness around my solar plexus area. And when my head is not busy, when it's empty, which really is a practice.
Mm-hmm.
So you can.
Yeah. I was just going to say, I can relate. And okay, follow-up question to that. So I like your answer. It's awesome. And what would you say? So my podcast, the tagline is Unleashing Greatness Within. What would be 3 pieces of advice you would give the listeners to unleash their inner greatness?
I would say that to unleash your inner greatness, you must spend time with yourself. Get to know yourself. I think that a lot of people define who they are by what they do for a living, or how many kids they have, or how many years they've been married, or whatever. That stuff is not who they are. So spend time with yourself to really find out who you are. I would say to intentionally reflect on your behavior is another way to unleash greatness. And what comes up for me is to unleash your greatness, you've got to have full-on confidence in yourself. And that starts with self-respect and self-trust. So to practice actually tuning in to the body when I feel like I haven't been respected, most people don't do anything about that. They go, it doesn't matter. I'll deal with it next time. I hate him. I think he's an asshole anyway. You're not dealing with it. That's an act of disrespect towards yourself. So I would say if you can practice self-respect, that will eventually lead to self-trust. And you all have a little professor inside of you, so you know what you can trust and what you can't. And that leads to confidence, which is, it's an ongoing story. It's not a quick fix. So to really unleash your greatness, stay doing the work. That's what I would say.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. Okay. And so last question, what would be a call to action that you would give the listeners based on your message today?
Go to my website, find your number, and WhatsApp it to me, because then I get to change your life. Call to action would be find your number and read what I say on my website. And yeah, don't believe everything you say on the you read on the internet about the Enneagram, because there's a lot of charlatans out there. So whatever you do read, check with yourself. Is that true or not? And then you respectfully leave whatever you don't resonate with whoever wrote it.
Yeah, no, I love it. And definitely reach out to you. And after listening to this, if you are curious, go to Saffron's website and figure out what your number is and learn about yourself, right? I think that would be a wonderful first step. And we will put all your information in the show notes so that people can reach out to you. And just Saffron, thank you so much for showing up here today and being resilient enough for us to make this happen. I love it. Just speaking to you just makes me happy. It makes me miss South Africa. And I'm just grateful to know you. And of course, I love you because we're both sevens.
High five, my sister in 7.
Yeah, high five. Yeah.
When you hang out, before COVID, I used to run support groups, and I used to love the 7 group because I always felt so normal.
I love it. So just thank you for being here and sharing, and we'll definitely have you back on for a part 2. Thanks so much.
Thank you for the privilege of letting me share the Enneagram today. Thank you.
And just once again, thanks, Saffron, for being on this week's episode, chatting about the Enneagram, which you clearly are an expert in. And for those of you who are listening, head over to Saffron's website. It will be in the show notes, and you can take the short quiz to get your Enneagram type. I was a number 7, so go figure out who you are so that you can learn and discover more about yourself and have awareness around you and your coping mechanisms, how it shows up for you to heal and engage with others and communicate on a personal level, and also in turn in business, how to build better business relationships. And just, I always believe awareness before change. And so just gain some extra awareness about yourself so that you can show up in relationships better, both personally and professionally, and then also get the results that you desire in your life, and just use that as a tool for support. So cool. Love learning new things. And so thank you so much for listening. If you got value from today's episode, please head over and just like and comment, leave a review. You can head over and watch this episode on YouTube and subscribe. I would be forever grateful. And just once again, thanks so much for listening. With love, greatness, and success, it's your host, Kelly Beveridge.